die for Egypt, what would you die for?
She loved deeply, fought courageously, outsmarting her rivals. Cleopatra walked through the sandstorm of history and left footprints so deep that no man could ever erase them.
On May 10th, 2023, Netflix dropped a production by Jada Pinkett Smith, or rather, a woman whose name shall be kept out of our mouths, about the popular, iconic, titular, historical figure Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the descendant of a Macedonian Greek general and companion of Alexander the Great. Now, a lot of people were very upset when this Netflix production dropped, which is usually not surprising given Netflix's track record, but why specifically was this production an issue? Well, you see, this pretty woman right here, the fluffy neck, is apparently the one who is playing Cleopatra.
Ciao Sammy, qual è il tuo preferito?
Oh! Many people may think, so what? It is completely normal to portray different characters in different ways. However, the issue comes when a character already has an established look. But even with the introduction of such characters, liberties can be taken to change their appearance or to have different visual presentations, especially if it's done in a new medium, like they did with Jason Momoa's Aquaman. As long as a person can live up to the role and put on a, wow, stop. It's more or less understood. But when it's about an actual historical figure that existed and already has a general established appearance based on their ethnicity, then it becomes an issue with portrayal. When portraying historical figures who really existed, actual people who have historical documentation, it's really important to consider their authentic appearance, which is typically grounded in their ethnic background. This is because these people have a well-documented physical representation and identity, and ignoring these facts and misrepresenting their ethnicity or appearance can distort the historical truth, and it can lead to some issues concerning accuracy and even cultural sensitivity in the portrayal. This would be as egregious as depicting a classical Nigerian tale about a beautiful Nigerian princess brought to life through a Netflix production, and inaccurately casting a white actress in the role of a Nigerian princess, which would present a distorted representation of the story as if it were factual, which could lead to some serious misrepresentations and criticisms, and well-warranted ire from the people of that cultural sect. There are so many different stories just based on the origins of people from the location. So the reason why a lot of Egyptians and the Black community is upset is because the people who produced this Netflix documentary are making it seem as though this is something that actually happened. Or more so, this is the way that this iconic Egyptian or Greek person of history actually looked. Many argue that nobody knows what Cleopatra looks like, but yet there are historical artifacts based on her profile and facial structure. I mean, to be fair, those in favor of a Black Cleopatra might make the same argument for historical figures such as Genghis Khan. Most accounts describe Genghis Khan as tall and strong with a flowing mane of hair and a long bushy beard. But then you have this shocking description from a 14th century Persian chronicler called Rashad al-Din, who claimed that Genghis Khan had red hair and green eyes. However, this person never actually met Genghis Khan face to face. But then again, these types of features were also not unheard of among ethnically diverse Mongols. What was certain is that he was a Mongol. Although there are no definitive portraits or descriptions to determine his exact appearance, just like Cleopatra, certain ethnic and geographic attributes can give us some clues. These physical traits vary significantly across populations due to environmental adaptations and sexual selection. The so-called Mongoloid racial group, primarily associated with East Asia, including the East Indies, China, Japan, and surrounding islands, generally shares distinct physical characteristics. It's widely accepted that individuals of Mongolian ancestry typically have a yellowish tawny complexion, a small narrow skull with flatter sides, and a lower set forehead, slender almond-shaped eyes, often with epicanthal folds, and long black hair. What is clear, though, is that the two depictions that we have of Genghis Khan, his statue atop a horse, and his earliest portrait showcase him having the facial structure similar to that of many East Asian, Central Asian, and Siberian populations. It's fair to say that the majority of an ethnic group, especially back in ancient times, were more or less physically or phenotypically similar. Limited opportunities for travel and intermingling compared to the present day contributed to this homogeneity. Turning our attention to Cleopatra, however, the few available depictions of her suggest a distinct facial structure akin to observations made about Genghis Khan. The problem, and the insulting aspect about this documentary being made, is the fact that the creators of the Netflix docudrama are anachronistically applying modern racial constructs to an ancient civilization. Even historical portrayals of Cleopatra, such as those by Elizabeth Taylor, and even recent plans to have Gal Gadot play Cleopatra, have encountered significant criticism. It's ironic because the central argument was that these actresses do not accurately represent Cleopatra's appearance. But back then, in 2020, Gal Gadot, or Gal Gadot as people call her, was actually defending her right to play it. People were accusing her of whitewashing Cleopatra, and the arguments were based on people attacking her for saying that an Arab or African actress should play the Egyptian queen. Keep in mind that Egypt is in Africa, Egyptians are African. To which she replied, first of all, if you want to be true to the facts, then Cleopatra was Macedonian. We were looking for a Macedonian actress that could fit Cleopatra. She wasn't there, and I was very passionate about Cleopatra. I just want to interject that I don't think that an actress or actor should have to be from a country to play it unless they're the ones who most suitably understand the culture. And so it's very easy to work with them. That being said, the person does have to look like the person comes from that time or that region. If the person who Jada Pinkett still had black ethnicity, but they were also racially ambiguous, so they could pass for a Greek Macedonian person, it wouldn't really matter whether or not they were ethnically black, only that they looked the part. While this topic certainly generates a lot of controversy based on the scant evidence available, but yet also the physical traits suggested by Cleopatra's bust, it's reasonable to assume that Cleopatra likely wasn't dark-skinned. Historical accounts often describe her as pale-skinned, and her Macedonian heritage further supports this. Egypt, in the midst of all of this, reacted with ire, and it's said that Egypt's Ministry of Antiquity stated that the series represented a falsification of Egyptian history. Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Archaeology through the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities released a statement on the issue saying that Queen Cleopatra was light-skinned and had Hellenic features. They cited coins, statues, and other depictions of Cleopatra's evidence, and they added, far from any ethnic racism, stressing full respect for African civilizations and for our brothers in the African continent that bring us all together. Egyptian archaeologist and public official Zahi Hawass was critical of the second season, claiming that it was completely fake, that Cleopatra was Greek, meaning that she was light-skinned, not black, and adding that Netflix is trying to provoke confusion by spreading false and deceptive facts that the origin of the Egyptian civilization is black.
Remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school, Cleopatra was black.
Moreover, I believe it's not within the purview of Americans to produce a documentary that essentially rewrites and dominates the history of another nation. People might not think it's a big deal, but imagine the national outcry if Egyptians were to make their own documentary about a popular icon like Solomon Northup, or someone as instrumental and iconic as Harriet Tubman. Suppose instead of photographs, only paintings or sculptures were available. But despite historical descriptions of these figures, the Egyptians declared that these prominent heroes were actually Egyptian. Any person of darker complexion objecting to this portrayal would be labeled as racist. Imagine them producing such a documentary with minimal research to serve their narrative, inaccurately showcasing to their population how they played a pivotal role, not just in the oppression they allegedly endured, but also in how they reshaped the United States, and how the US is actually what it is because of them. The response to such a scenario would likely be contentious. Imagine a white person claiming the history of an ancient Japanese historical figure. To me, this is just as egregious as rewriting history to make awful characters such as the Dahomey depicted in the Woman King look like heroes, when in fact they were some of the biggest instrumental figures responsible for the slave trade. Making this movie and painting the Dahomey as such was just as insulting as what they've done with Cleopatra. Many Africans hated the Woman King, and it was a blatant F-you to their culture and history. Even Lupita, a Kenyan Mexican, refused to play a part in the Dahomey movie.
What I was able to find was a documentary she did back in 2019 about the Dahomey Kingdom and the Agoge warriors. That's where she learned the true history of who they were. In the video, she cries when she learns that the Agoge were not the iconic freedom fighters they were idolized for being. According to legend, they fought against European colonialism. And they did do that, but for the most part, they were slave traders who continued the practice long after it was prohibited in the West. And when they couldn't sell slaves to Europe any longer, they continued selling them to neighboring countries. Lupita even interviewed an elderly lady who was the granddaughter of a woman who was sold by the Agoge. And when she learned about what they did to her family, she broke out in tears. And it was shortly after that documentary that she pulled out of the Woman King project. Again, I don't know the specifics as to why she pulled out. She never made a statement officially. But if it's because of what she learned while doing that documentary, while learning that true history, I commend her for showing integrity.
And as the layman's Journal put it, integrity in this case matters more than money. I mean, they take something that was a negative part of their history and rewrite it to make people think it's positive instead of actually highlighting the positive stories out there. And these creators hijack someone else's culture to fit their agenda. This is a definitely dangerous precedent as it can fuel culture wars, not only within our nation, but against others as well. You may be wondering why people get so viscerally upset about someone who doesn't even exist anymore. Well, that's because a lot of the stories and historical figures told in ancient times have shaped cultures and have given them identity. I would be very upset knowing the story about my ancestors and someone from some other country coming in and seeing the difference that my ancestor made and then claiming my ancestor was of a different ethnicity and claiming my culture for their own. It would be very insulting, and it's as if you're trying to remove or invalidate the existence of a culture that's already there. It may seem like a very small thing, but then again, recall the analogy that I gave. We only have to imagine each other walking in the other person's shoes and question how we would like it. While there might be a case for not knowing exactly what Cleopatra looked like, people still have a pretty good idea, and it definitely is not what was portrayed in the Netflix documentary. Even if you present the argument that a great deal of ancient Egyptians were black, which is backed by many scholars, Cleopatra was not Egyptian by way of ethnicity, but she was Greek with some Persian and Sogdian Iranian ancestry. This is definitely not Jada Pinkett's story to tell, especially if she's not going to do so truthfully and thoroughly. And she very egotistically went ahead to do this, seemingly because she wanted to, and not because she actually put any thought into it, or sought the insight from several peers in the Egyptian historic fields. It's important that we represent history as accurately as possible. This isn't the first time history has been misrepresented, and it certainly won't be the last time. But in a day and age where we have the resources to simply research these things on our own, it's almost impossible to have the money and the resources that someone like Jada Pinkett has, and not find all the sources needed to make an actual substantial documentary based on fact and evidence. Everybody whose grandmothers who sent them to school and then told them not to learn what they're teaching in school should certainly reconsider whether or not their grandmothers were actually educated enough to be giving them that kind of advice. I have a lot of family members that tell me that I should just believe in something that has no evidence, and even when I show them the blatant contradictions within their own literature, they straight up tell me that it doesn't have to make sense. And I don't just sit there as a scholar and regurgitate that blatant ignorance. I think for myself, and I'm able to point out whether they're family to me or not, that they're delusional. And just as I'm willing to call out my own family, these elders should be willing to do the same and actually think. This is not a religion, this is history, and this is someone else's culture. We should respect it and be truthful, or else we do a disservice to our communities and end up embarrassing ourselves in front of the rest of the world. Now, all of that being said, it's also important to note that with the dawn of this gracious presentation that Jada Pinkett Smith has bestowed upon the world, there are sects of people that are Egyptian or of Egyptian descent that are coming at it from a prejudicial point of view. Unfortunately, there are innocent people who are getting caught in the crossfire of this backlash. And it's important to note also that there are Black Egyptians. There's a lot to be said about the different ethnicities having migrated, the migrational patterns of different groups of people having come into sects of the world. I mean, that has happened all throughout history. But what we shouldn't do is jump on the bandwagon of invalidating people's history. I don't see in one breath how many Egyptians are saying and fighting for their right, as is their full right to do, to protect their history and to protect their culture as a result of being proud to be Egyptian. But yet, they are the same ones, a lot of them, who are also treating actual Black Egyptians the way that Jada Pinkett is treating Egyptians as a result of the outcry from this documentary. Now, in this video, there's an Egyptian girl who happens to be Black. And I don't know, I'm just going off of face value here from what she says because I don't see the reason to lie about something like this. And from what I know, she's ethnically Egyptian. Her mother, apparently, as far as I know, is Egyptian. Or, it's possible both her parents are Egyptian. But what is certain through listening to her videos is that her mother is. And I don't know if she was receiving all this hate because she was caught up in the backlash of all of this, and due to everyone kind of lumping everyone in the Black community in the same boat, she unfortunately got a piece of that rancid pie. But this also is definitely not okay.
But unfortunately, Egyptians are telling her that she's not Egyptian because she's Black. Let me show you this clip, we'll come back and discuss.
Hey guys, so I've been running my Egyptian jewelry brand for about 3 years now, and if you've been following me on TikTok, you know that every time a TikTok goes viral where I mention that I'm Egyptian, I get a lot of hate. And it's I don't know, I'm laughing, it's not funny, it's serious. Yeah, I get a lot of hate, and it is from Egyptians telling me that I'm not Egyptian, which is fun. It's what everyone wants to hear. In the beginning, I used to get really upset. I didn't even know that we had a slur for black people in Egypt before I started TikTok. Like, I lived such a naive life. I remember the first time somebody used the slur on me, I literally went to my mom and I thought they were calling me like zesty, like exotic. And I went to her and I was like, what does this mean? And she was like, oh. I was like, oh.
Now, for the people who are making fun of her because of her accent and claiming that it doesn't sound like an Egyptian accent, it is clear that she is from the UK or she was brought up in the UK. I didn't think this would have to be a thing that we'd have to be talking about, but I'm sure, unless people are living under a rock, that you're supposed to be aware that if your family is from a different country, let's say Kenya, or you're from Pakistan, or from the Caribbean, and you move over to the UK or emigrate there, and you have children and they grow up in that new country, that they're most likely going to have the accent of the new country, but they're still ethnically a part of the DNA from the country that you moved from. I didn't think this was rocket science.
To say I'm upset, and it's not out of anger or like being hurt or anything like that. It's more so that we can keep this conversation in the spotlight to show people that, yeah, racism is bad in Egypt. Like, it's really bad. Like, it's awful. Something I want to make very clear. One, not all Egyptians are racist, so don't come in the comments being like, Egyptians are the worst, blah, 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 because no. So this is the thing. The racism I get is from Egyptians back home, not in the diaspora. But the Egyptians back home are well aware that black Egyptians exist. They know about Nubians. They know about Aswan. Like, they know that darker skinned Egyptians are around, more so than Egyptians in the diaspora. But the thing is, we are not represented. They're used to seeing white Egyptians represent them, even on TikTok. And I have not seen Egyptians that look like me with a platform on TikTok. So when they see a dark-skinned Egyptian being successful and claiming to be Egyptian, no way. The audacity of this girl to try and claim that she's Egyptian, because we don't let people like you succeed. One time, somebody tried to apologize for the racism I experienced in Egypt by saying, but I mean, don't be upset about the racism. It's just because they don't expect Nubians to do well. Like, are we sure that's how we would apologize? So I'm just hoping by me continually bringing these videos to the spotlight, maybe other people can start talking about racism too that it is in Egypt, because I know that every single Egyptian is aware of the racism in Egypt. Not one Egyptian can come and tell me that there isn't racism in Egypt and it's not a huge problem, because they would be lying. For Ramadan? But yeah, so I'm gonna keep making these videos just to make sure that this conversation doesn't stop and that it is something that we can work towards solving. You shouldn't be selling Egyptian culture if you're not Egyptian and don't tell other Africans to our stuff. طب ومين قال لك ان انا مش مصرية؟ ولا عشان انا سودة يبقى ما ينفعش اكون مصرية؟ على فكرة انا اصلي فرعني. احنا اللي بنينا البلد. وانت فاكر مصر فين؟ في اوروبا؟ What's other Africans؟ العنصرية اللي فيك تكسف. روح اتعلم شوية وبطل جهل. I've addressed comments like these twice on TikTok before, and I've deleted hundreds of comments. And the fact I'm being questioned by nobody except Egyptians. My own people who are supposed to support me are the ones trying to bring me down. Is it that hard for you to understand that there's an Egyptian woman running a successful business just because I'm black? It's impossible. And if you say it's not a race issue, wallah, you're lying, because لو كنت مصرية بيضة, I would not get any of this hate. These are some of my favorite creators, and not once do they ever get a comment saying, are you even Egyptian? Whereas that's what I get daily. There's absolutely no reason to drag my mum into this. يعني انت واحد مش متربي أو واحدة. I don't know who you are, but the jealousy is reeking. والله أنا زهقت منكم وقرفت وتعبت. If you don't like me, block me. I don't need your business. I don't want your business. I don't want you in my business. Just go away.
Many people forget that despite how progressive and first world the United States is, that there are many countries across the sea that are still decades behind us in terms of progressivism. America seems to have also, based on the entertainment that America is now putting out, have skewed all the way on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to inclusivity. However, based on the comments that I've seen under videos like hers, there are a significant portion of people from other countries or even from Egypt do seem to display a considerable amount of racial vitriol. America went through it. Almost every country that I know of at some point in their history have gone through it. And you only have to travel to some of these countries and see how they react to certain things such as homosexuality or interracial marriages, or how they view Caucasian Americans or how they view Black Americans, and you only have to hear them speak to understand that it's not all all beds and roses over there. Many countries are still very behind when it comes to the age of racial or social inclusion. People should still have the right to maintain their tradition and culture. But there are still those who are guilty, even within that country, of denying people who actually are culturally Egyptian and ethnically Egyptian, mainly because of the color of their skin. So, in so saying, Cleopatra definitely was not Egyptian. We know that. It doesn't excuse the fact that there are a multitude of Egyptians who were darker skinned. Based on the little bit of reading that I did, in the 25th dynasty of Egypt, 744 BC to 656 BC, there was an alternate title for the dynasty called the Nubian dynasty, or the Kushite Empire, or the Black Pharaohs, or the Napatans, after their capital Napata. And it was said to be the last dynasty of the third intermediate period of Egypt that occurred after the Nubian invasion. The 25th dynasty was a line of pharaohs who originated in the kingdom of Kush, located in present-day northern Sudan and Upper Egypt. They reigned in part or all of ancient Egypt for nearly a century from the period that I mentioned earlier. After the emperor Sargon II and Sennacherib defeated attempts by the Nubian kings to gain a foothold in the Near East, their successors, Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, sorry if I'm butchering those names, invaded, defeated, and drove out the Nubians in the Assyrian conquest of Egypt. And then eventually, somebody else took over and invaded them. And it's just this long ancient tale of people driving out others and others going in. So everybody's kind of right and everybody's kind of wrong. A lot of Black Egyptians might be calling lighter skinned Egyptians as invaders, but their ancestors too were invaders, and the people before them were invaders as well. So who really is Egyptian? Or is it possible that everyone who has had ancestry in Egypt, regardless of where that came from, just like the Americans when they came to America, and the whole clash with the Native Americans that were already here, which probably weren't inherently here, and they came and migrated to the area as well, is considered Egyptian. So all this infighting about who's Egyptian, who's not Egyptian makes no sense. The main soggy skin of the soup is that Cleopatra herself, who is the main subject of this whole matter, is not Egyptian. Maybe through nationality of her coming there and through marriage and whatnot, but ethnically, she's not. And I hate how this has become a catalyst for now two nations fighting each other. And then the nation within themselves fighting each other, and then the nation with themselves here in the USA fighting each other too. This is what Jada Pinkett does. Just sets fire to everything she touches. In part, because people are responsible for their own actions. But seriously, what was she thinking with this? Anyways, thanks so much for watching. This has been Ultiori. You ask, we answer.